Welcome to another deep dive.
Oh, nice.
Today, we're going way back, like sandals and togas back
Right.
to ancient Greece.
Right.
We're tackling a thinker
Yeah.
whose ideas are still debated
Mhm.
by philosophers and politicians and pretty much anyone who's ever pondered
Right.
what it means to be human.
Yeah, big questions.
You ready to meet Protagoras?
Always ready for a trip back to the Agora.
Protagoras is
Yeah.
someone I find endlessly fascinating.
He is interesting.
And you're right, his
Mhm.
ideas about truth and morality
Yeah,
and the whole human experience
Ah.
still have the power to shake things up,
he do.
even thousands of years later.
It's true.
You know me,
Yeah.
always up for a good intellectual shakeup.
I know you are.
Our main guide for this deep dive
Uh-huh.
is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Right.
It's a bit dense, but trust me,
I trust you.
it's a gold mine.
Gold mine, okay.
All right, so Protagoras is famous for this really provocative statement, man is the measure of all things.
Yes, that's the one.
But before we dive into what that even means,
Okay.
let's paint a picture
Sure.
of the world Protagoras lived in.
Okay. So,
It wasn't all olive groves
Right.
and philosophical chats, right?
definitely not.
Right.
Ancient Greece,
Right.
especially Athens,
Mhm.
in the 5th century BC,
Okay.
it was this incredible melting pot
Right.
of ideas and cultures.
Yeah.
It was a time of tremendous change,
Uh-huh.
politically and intellectually.
Yeah.
We're talking about the early days of democracy,
Wow.
the rise of new ways of thinking about the world.
Interesting.
It was a bit like Silicon Valley,
Oh, okay.
but with more sandals
Right.
and fewer venture capitalists.
I can see that. So
Yeah.
kind of a heady time to be alive, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of opportunities.
Lots of opportunities.
But also lots of uncertainty
Mhm.
and debate.
Lots of debate.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's where the sophists come in. Think of them as these itinerant teachers,
Right.
kind of like intellectual rock stars of their day.
Really? Okay.
They weren't tied to any one school of thought.
Interesting.
They were more about teaching practical skills,
Like what?
rhetoric,
Okay.
argumentation,
Uh-huh.
how to persuade people,
Mm-hmm.
how to succeed
Right.
in this new dynamic world.
So kind of like the original life coaches,
Yeah.
but with a heavy emphasis on logic
Yeah,
and eloquence.
exactly.
I can already picture them
Yeah.
holding court in the marketplace,
Uh-huh.
surrounded by eager students debating everything under the sun.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
imagine this scene.
Okay.
Into this world walks Protagoras,
Mm-hmm.
this sharp-witted sophist
Okay.
from Abdera,
All right.
and drops this bombshell.
Okay.
Of all things,
Mm-hmm.
the measure is man.
Right.
Of those that are,
Yeah.
that they are.
Okay.
And of those that are not,
Right.
that they are not. I bet the olive vendor's carts nearly tipped over
Uh-huh. Yeah.
from all the head scratching.
Okay.
Yeah,
Even I'm feeling a little head scratchy right now.
it's a big one.
Yeah, it's a pretty bold statement, right?
It is.
But what's he actually getting at?
Right.
What does it mean for man to be the measure of all things?
It's the million drachma question.
I bet.
And trust me,
Yeah.
even back then, people were arguing
Totally.
about what Protagoras really meant.
Interesting.
It's one of those ideas
Mm-hmm.
that's deceptively simple on the surface,
Okay.
but once you start unpacking it,
Yeah.
it opens up this whole Pandora's box
Oh, wow.
of questions about truth, perception,
Right.
and how we understand the world around us.
Let's start unpacking then.
Okay.
What are some of the different ways this man is the measure idea has
Yeah.
been interpreted?
One way to think about it
Yeah.
is to focus on the individual.
Okay.
When Protagoras says man,
Uh-huh.
he might be referring to each individual person.
Okay.
So if you feel the wind is warm,
Mm-hmm.
then for you, it is livus.
Interesting.
Your perception becomes the measure of reality.
So it's not like there's some objective wind temperature out there that
Yeah.
we're all measuring against.
Exactly.
It's more about how each of us experiences it
Yeah,
based on our own senses and
Right.
perceptions.
exactly.
I can see how that would have ruffled some feathers back then,
Oh, yeah,
especially among those who believed
right.
in a fixed divinely ordained order of things.
Absolutely. Imagine you're a philosopher
Okay.
or a priest claiming to have access to absolute truth,
Right.
and then Protagoras comes along
Yeah.
and says, hold on, maybe it's not that simple.
Huh?
Maybe each person has their own way
Right.
of measuring and making sense of the world.
That's a good point.
It's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
Talk about challenging the status quo.
Absolutely.
So if it's all about individual perception,
Yeah.
does that mean anything goes. Well, is it just a free-for-all of opinions?
Right.
With no way to determine what's actually true or not?
That's where things get really interesting,
Okay.
and where Protagoras has been the subject
Right.
of a lot of criticism, even from some of his contemporaries.
I see. Like who?
One of the most famous critiques comes from,
Yeah.
you guessed it,
Oh, let me guess.
Plato.
Plato.
Yeah,
Mr. World of Forms himself.
the one and only.
The guy who believed
Yes.
in this perfect, unchanging realm of ideas
Right.
beyond our sensory experience.
Exactly.
I can't imagine Achery was a big fan of
Yeah.
Protagoras' individual-centered
Yeah.
view of reality.
You're catching on quickly.
Ah, thanks.
Plato, as you know,
Mhm.
was all about finding that ultimate unchanging truth,
Yeah.
that capital T truth.
Right.
So for him,
Yeah.
Protagoras' focus on individual perception
Right.
is a bit of a philosophical headache.
I can only imagine their philosophical smackdowns.
Oh, I'm sure there were a few.
Did Plato try to debunk Protagoras?
He did.
Oh, really?
And that's where we have to be a bit careful.
Okay, why?
Plato was a brilliant philosopher,
Yeah.
no doubt,
Okay.
but he also had a tendency
What's that?
to present his opponent's views
Right.
in a way that made them easier to knock down.
I see. So we can't take his interpretation of Protagoras
Right.
as the gospel truth.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's important to read between the lines a bit.
It is.
Consider the biases at play,
Hmm.
and maybe even give Protagoras the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
It sounds like we need to look beyond just the sensory experience then.
Oh,
If man is the measure,
yeah.
isn't just about how we perceive the world around us.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
The word things, in that famous quote,
Yeah.
can encompass a lot more
Oh, like what?
than just physical sensations.
Okay.
It could refer to facts,
Mm-hmm.
events,
Okay.
even moral judgment.
Moral judgments. Interesting.
For example,
Yeah.
is stealing wrong?
Okay.
Protagoras might say
Mm-hmm.
that the measure of its rightness or wrongness
Right.
lies in how each individual,
Mm.
shaped by their own experiences and values,
Right.
judges that action.
So it's like our own personal histories,
Exactly.
our beliefs,
Yeah.
our values.
Right.
All of that becomes the lens through which we measure the world, including things like morality.
Precisely.
That's a pretty hefty responsibility, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It's another reason why Protagoras was so controversial.
Okay.
He was essentially turning the tables
Mm-hmm.
on the whole idea of absolute truth
Yeah.
being handed down from on high,
Right.
whether from the gods or
Okay.
from some all-knowing philosopher.
Interesting.
He was putting humans at the center
Wait.
of their own understanding of the world.
Okay, that's starting to make more sense.
Good.
It's not that there's no reality out there,
Right.
but rather that our individual experiences
Yes.
and interpretations play a huge role
They do?
in how we understand and interact with that reality.
Exactly. Protagoras seems to be suggesting
Mm-hmm.
that there might not be one single universally correct answer
Right.
to every question.
Yeah.
Instead, there might be multiple valid perspectives,
Interesting.
and each person's understanding is shaped
Yeah.
by their own unique measure.
This raises so many questions.
I know, right?
Like, if everyone's truth is valid,
Right.
how can we even have meaningful conversations or
Yeah.
learn from each other?
That's a good question.
Wouldn't we all just be trapped
Yeah.
in our own little bubbles of subjective reality?
That's a question that has plagued philosophers for centuries,
I bet.
and it leads to some pretty serious objections
Okay.
to Protagoras' philosophy,
Uh-oh, like what?
like the charges of self-contradiction
Self-contradiction.
and
Okay.
solipsism.
Solipsism, all right. Those sound like some heavy philosophical hitters.
They are.
Let's dive into those.
Okay.
But maybe first we should grab a quick cup of coffee.
Sounds good.
I'm feeling like I need a little brain fuel
I agree.
after all this mind-bending discussion.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
All right, let's tackle those objections
Yeah.
to Protagoras' ideas.
Okay.
You're right, they are some heavy hitters
Yeah.
in the world of philosophy.
Amen.
First up,
Yeah.
self-contradiction.
Hit me with it.
Okay.
How does a philosophy where man is the measure contradict itself?
Well, the critics,
Okay.
many of whom were also philosophers,
Okay.
they pointed out
Uh-huh.
a potential flaw
Okay.
in Protagoras' logic.
Okay, what is it?
They argued,
Yeah.
if every individual's judgment is true for them,
Right.
then wouldn't the judgment that Protagoras is wrong
Yeah.
also have to be true?
I see the dilemma.
Yeah.
It's like saying all opinions are valid,
Right.
but then someone says, yeah,
Your opinion that all opinions are valid is wrong.
exactly.
It creates a bit of a philosophical pretzel.
It does.
Yeah.
It's a clever argument,
Uh-huh.
often called the paratrope,
Okay.
which essentially means
What does that mean?
turning the tables.
Okay, I see.
There's
But
that-
even though we only have fragments
Right.
of Protagoras' actual writings,
Yeah.
we can get a sense
Yeah.
of how he might have responded to this
Yeah,
challenge.
exactly.
Okay, I'm all ears.
All right.
How did Protagoras defend himself
Well,
against this intellectual judo move?
it seems Protagoras might have countered
That's okay.
by doubling down
Okay.
on the idea that truth is relative to the individual.
All right.
So
yeah.
even if someone believes Protagoras is wrong,
Yeah.
well, that belief is true for them,
Okay.
but it doesn't invalidate Protagoras' own perspective.
So Protagoras is essentially saying...
Yeah. Even if you think I'm wrong, you're right from your perspective. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's a pretty slippery argument,
It is.
but I can see how it avoids a direct contradiction.
I think so.
But doesn't it still raise some thorny issues
Oh, it does.
about the possibility of meaningful dialogue
Right.
and learning from each other?
You're spot on.
Okay.
That's where the second major criticism comes in.
Okay, what's that?
The charge of solipsism.
Ah, solipsism,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
That's the idea,
Uh-huh.
that only one's own mind is sure to exist.
Precisely.
Okay.
And the critics worried
Yeah.
that if everyone's truth
Uh-huh.
is entirely individual and subjective,
Okay.
then how could we ever truly communicate or learn from each other?
I see what you mean.
It would be like
Yeah.
everyone speaking a different language
Right.
with no common ground for translation
Okay.
or shared understanding.
I can see their point.
Yeah.
If we're all trapped in our own little worlds of subjective experience, then
Right.
what's the point of even
Yeah.
trying to have a conversation,
Yeah.
let alone build a society
Yeah.
based on shared values and goals?
It's a valid concern.
It is.
And thankfully,
Yeah.
we have some clues
Okay.
about how Protagoras might have addressed it.
Okay, like what?
Plato,
Okay.
in his dialogue, Theaetetus,
Mm-hmm.
actually includes a section
Oh, all right.
called Protagoras' Apology,
Right.
where he puts some potential defenses
Yeah.
in Protagoras' mouth.
Wait. Plato is giving Protagoras a platform to defend himself.
He is.
That seems a bit out of character
It does, doesn't it?
for someone who is so critical of his ideas.
Yeah, but remember,
Okay.
Plato often presented his opponent's arguments
Uh-huh.
in the strongest possible light
Okay.
before trying to refute them.
Right.
And in this apology,
Mm-hmm.
Protagoras makes a key distinction
What's that?
between knowledge and wisdom.
Knowledge versus wisdom. Sounds juicy.
It is an interesting one.
Break it down for me.
Yeah.
How does this distinction help Protagoras wiggle out of the solipsism trap?
Here's the gist.
Okay.
Protagoras seems to be arguing
Yeah.
that while everyone might be a measure
Right.
of their own truth,
Mm-hmm.
some people
Yeah.
are better at making judgments
Okay.
that lead to positive outcomes.
Interesting.
This is where wisdom comes in.
So it's not just about having your own individual truth,
No.
but about the quality of your judgments
Exactly.
and how well they align with what's beneficial
Yeah.
for yourself and
Yeah.
for society as a whole.
Exactly.
So it's like saying we can all have our own opinions,
yeah.
but some opinions are more informed,
Right.
more thoughtful,
Yes.
more likely to lead to good results
Like
than
that.
others.
Right.
It's not just a free-for-all
Well-
where all perspectives are equally valid.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is where Protagoras saw the role
Yeah.
of the sophist.
Okay, interesting.
They weren't just teaching empty rhetoric or
Yeah.
how to win arguments
Okay.
for the sake of winning.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to cultivate wisdom
Right.
in their students
Yeah.
to help them make better judgments,
Oh.
even in a world
Right.
where absolute truth might be elusive.
This has given me a whole new perspective on sophistry.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I always thought of them
Yeah.
as kind of shady manipulators.
Right.
But maybe they were more like early cognitive therapists or something,
Mm.
helping people develop the mental tools
Exactly.
to navigate a complex and uncertain world.
It's a fascinating reinterpretation,
It is.
and it highlights another crucial aspect
Okay.
of Protagoras' philosophy,
All right, what's that?
his emphasis on the practical
Okay.
and the useful.
Right.
Remember how we talked about that things
Yeah.
in his famous statement?
Yeah, I do.
Well, the actual word Protagoras used,
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? What is that?
krema, has an interesting implication.
Ooh. a linguistic deep dive.
I thought you might like that.
Yeah, I love it when we get into the nitty-gritty
Me too.
of word origins.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Okay, so crema
Yeah.
comes from a verb
Okay.
that means to treat,
Interesting.
to use,
Okay.
or to have a relationship with.
So the emphasis is not just on the things themselves,
Exactly. Yeah.
but on how we relate to them, how
Right.
we use them, how we
Yeah.
judge them.
That's it.
So it's not just about passively perceiving the world,
Yeah.
but about actively engaging with it,
Exactly.
making choices, taking actions
Right.
based on our individual understanding of what's good, bad, useful,
Like
and
that.
so on.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
Protagoras seems to be saying
Yeah.
that the meaning we find in things,
Right.
whether it's a beautiful sunset
Yeah.
or a complex ethical dilemma, comes from our own engagement with them,
Right.
shaped by our unique experiences, values,
Yeah.
and judgments.
This is starting to click for me.
Good.
Protagoras isn't saying there's no such thing as reality.
No.
Or that everyone lives in their own completely isolated bubble.
Yeah,
He's acknowledging the role of individual perspective
exactly.
in shaping our understanding of the world and our choices within it.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this leads to another important point
Okay.
about Protagoras.
Yeah, what's that?
He doesn't seem to be saying
Hmm.
that all perspectives
Okay.
are equally valid,
Right.
or that anything goes.
Hmm.
He's not a strict relativist in that sense.
So how do we know which perspectives are better
That's a good question.
or more useful if
Yeah.
there's no absolute yardstick,
Right.
no capital T truth
Yeah.
to measure them against?
That's where wisdom comes in again.
Okay.
It's about being able to make judgments
Right.
that lead to positive outcomes,
Right. Yeah.
both for ourselves
Uh-huh.
and for the community.
Right.
It's about having the discernment
Okay.
to recognize which perspectives
Yeah.
are more likely to contribute
Oh, yeah.
to a flourishing society.
So even though we all have our own measure of things,
Yes.
some people might be better at, let's
Yeah.
say, calibrating their instruments,
Uh-huh. I like that.
making sure their judgments are aligned
Uh-huh.
with what's truly beneficial.
That's a fantastic analogy.
Thanks.
And Protagoras seems to believe
Yeah.
that this ability to make wise judgments
Right.
can be developed
Okay.
through education,
Yeah.
through careful thought
Mm.
and consideration of different perspectives,
Right.
and through engagement
Uh-huh.
in the public sphere.
Okay, this is making Protagoras sound a lot less
Yeah.
like a radical subjectivist
Right.
and more like a thoughtful pragmatist
Mhm.
who's concerned with both individual flourishing
Exactly.
and the well-being of society as a whole.
Yeah. You're getting to the heart of it.
Thanks.
And this focus on the practical,
Right.
the useful,
Yeah.
permeates Protagoras' thought.
Okay.
But it also raises a tricky question.
Oh, what's that?
How do we decide what's truly useful?
Yeah, that is tricky.
In a world where individual perspectives hold so much weight,
Right.
what happens when people disagree
Right.
about what constitutes a positive outcome?
That's a question for the ages.
It really is.
And it's one we're still wrestling with today.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost
Okay.
in the complexities of modern life,
Right.
let's bring it back to Protagoras.
All right.
What else did he have to say about how we should navigate this world
Right.
of multiple perspectives
Mhm.
and the elusive nature of absolute truth?
There's one more fascinating angle
Oh, really?
to Protagoras' thought
Okay.
that we haven't even touched on yet.
Interesting. What's that?
His views on the gods.
The gods. Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting
Interesting. How so?
and potentially even more controversial
Okay.
than his man is the measure statement.
Ooh, now we're getting into some truly deep waters.
We are.
I can already sense the lightning bolts
Oh.
of Olympian disapproval heading our way.
Maybe.
What did Protagoras have to say about the divine realm? All right, let's dive into those divine waters. What did Protagoras have to say about the gods?
Well, in another famous quote, and remember we only have fragments of his actual writings,
Right.
Protagoras says something like, "Concerning the gods,
Yeah.
I have no means of knowing whether they exist or not,
Mm-hmm.
or of what sort they may be.
Interesting.
Many things prevent knowledge,
Like what?
including the obscurity of the subject
Okay.
and the brevity of human life."
Whoa. Talk about a bold statement, especially in ancient Greece,
Yeah,
where religion was so intertwined with everyday life. To publicly declare uncertainty about the gods,
Yeah.
that must have been a real shocker.
It was incredibly audacious,
Yeah.
and it suggests a kind of agnosticism
Okay.
that was quite rare in his time.
So he wasn't necessarily denying the existence of the gods outright,
Right.
but he was saying we simply can't know for sure one way or the other.
Exactly.
So he's acknowledging the limits of human knowledge,
Yes.
the fact that there might be things
Right.
beyond our capacity to fully grasp.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I mean, that's a pretty humble stance for a philosopher,
It is,
especially one known for putting humans at the center of things.
especially
Yeah.
it is. And the reasons he gives
Okay.
for this agnosticism
Mm-hmm.
are fascinating.
Okay.
He points to the obscurity of the subject,
Right.
perhaps suggesting that the nature of the divine
Okay.
is inherently beyond our human capacity
Yeah,
to understand,
I see.
and the brevity of human life.
That brevity of human life part really resonates with me.
Yeah, it's powerful.
It's a reminder that we're finite beings
Yeah.
trying to grapple with
Yeah.
potentially infinite questions. It's like he's urging us to focus on what we can know
Yeah,
and do within the realm of human experience.
exactly.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to
Okay.
Protagoras' emphasis on the practical
Okay.
and the useful.
Right.
He seems to be saying,
Yeah.
let's not get bogged down in debates about things
Right.
that are ultimately unknowable.
Okay.
Let's focus on
Yeah.
what we can actually learn,
Okay.
understand,
Mm-hmm.
and apply
Okay.
to improve our lives and our communities.
I'm starting to see Protagoras
Mhm.
as this ultimate philosophical pragmatist.
Ah.
He's challenging us to make the most
Right.
of our limited time on this earth,
Yes.
to focus on what's within our reach,
Exactly.
and to strive for wisdom and excellence
Yeah.
in all that we do.
That's a great way to sum it up.
Thanks.
And it's a challenge that's still incredibly relevant today,
It is.
especially in an age of information overload
Yeah.
and competing claims to truth.
It's making me wonder if Protagoras were alive today,
Okay.
what would he think
Right.
about the internet,
Mm-hmm.
social media, the constant bombardment of information and opinions?
That's a great question.
Would he see it as a validation
Mm-hmm.
of his man is the measure philosophy?
Right.
Or would he caution us against getting lost in the noise
Mm-hmm.
and losing sight of what's truly important?
That's a fascinating question,
Yeah.
and one I think we'll have to ponder further.
Okay.
But before we get too carried away
Right.
with the modern implications,
Okay.
let's take a moment to appreciate
Right.
just how radical and influential
Right.
Protagoras' ideas were
Yeah.
back in ancient Greece.
Right.
We're talking about a time when people were literally putting philosophers on trial
Yeah.
for challenging religious beliefs.
Right.
Socrates comes to mind,
Yeah.
and the whole Hemlock cocktail incident.
It makes Protagoras' willingness
Right.
to publicly express his agnosticism
Yeah.
even more impressive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's worth remembering
Oh.
that Protagoras wasn't just some ivory tower intellectual.
Yeah.
He was a teacher,
Yeah.
a rhetorician,
Okay.
someone deeply engaged
Yeah.
in the public life of his time.
So he wasn't just theorizing
No.
about the nature of truth
Right.
and the limits of knowledge.
Yeah.
He was trying to equip people
He was.
with the intellectual tools
Yeah.
to navigate the complexities of the world around them.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that brings us to another fascinating
Yeah.
and often overlooked aspect
What's that?
of Protagoras' thought,
Okay.
his ideas about justice.
Justice. Okay.
But before we dive into that,
Yeah.
maybe we should take a quick breather.
Sounds good.
All this talk of ancient Greece
Right.
is making me thirsty for some good Greek wine.
Okay. I've had my metaphorical sip of Greek wine. Let's dive back into the world of Protagoras. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Man is the measure, the
Mhm.
wisdom over absolute truth thing. Yeah. And even his intriguing agnosticism about the gods.
Right.
But you mentioned justice.
I did.
How does that fit into his philosophy?
Justice is where Protagoras gets really practical, I think.
Okay.
Remember, he was living in a time
Yeah.
when the very idea of democracy was still new and fragile.
Right.
So the question of how to create a just society
Okay.
was front and center.
That makes sense. So how did Mr. Man is the measure approach something as seemingly universal as justice?
Well, first of all,
Yeah.
he seems to reject the idea
Okay.
that justice is some kind of fixed eternal law
Uh-huh.
handed down from the heavens.
Interesting.
Instead, he leans towards what we
Yeah.
call a conventionalist view.
Conventionalist.
Yeah.
So justice is like a set of rules we all just agree on.
Yeah.
No cosmic judge banging a gavel on Mount Olympus.
That's the basic idea.
Okay.
Protagoras seems to believe
Yeah.
that justice is a human creation.
Okay.
It's a set of conventions, agreements,
Okay.
laws,
Right.
basically tools
Yeah.
that we develop
Right.
to ensure that society functions smoothly
Okay.
and people can live together in relative harmony.
Okay, I can see how that would have been a pretty radical idea back then.
Oh, for sure.
It kind of democratizes the whole concept of justice, right?
Exactly.
It's not about pleasing the gods
Oh, yeah.
or adhering to some abstract cosmic order.
Right.
It's about figuring out what works best for us
Exactly.
here and now
Yes.
in the messy reality of human society.
Exactly. And this has some fascinating implications.
Okay. Like what?
For one thing,
Yeah.
if justice is based on convention, it means it can evolve and change over time
Okay.
as society's needs and values change.
So it's not set in stone.
Nope.
No 10 Commandments of Justice
Right.
etched into some eternal tablet.
No.
That's a pretty dynamic view.
Very much so. Protagoras seems to be saying
Yeah.
that justice is a living, breathing thing. It's shaped by the ongoing dialogue, debates,
Okay.
and agreements within a community.
This is making me think about all the debates we have today
I know, right?
about laws,
Right.
rights, social
Yeah.
justice.
Right.
It's like Protagoras is giving us a framework
Yeah.
for understanding how these conversations work
Exactly.
and why they're so important.
That's a great insight. His ideas provide a foundation
Yeah.
for understanding the dynamism of justice
Right.
and the crucial role of democratic deliberation
Okay.
in shaping a just society.
It's not about appealing to
Right.
some external authority,
Well,
but about engaging in reasoned debate,
yes,
considering different perspectives
Right.
and finding common ground.
precisely.
So even though there might not be one single
Right.
universally agreed upon definition of justice
Yeah,
for all time and all places,
Yeah.
there's still a way to work towards it,
yeah, I think so.
to strive for a more just society
Right.
through dialogue, compromise.
And collective decision-making.
That seems to be Protagoras' message.
It's pretty inspiring.
It is.
And it's one that resonates powerfully today
Absolutely.
as we face complex social challenges
Yes.
and grapple with questions of fairness,
Right.
equality,
Uh-huh.
and the common good.
It's true.
This has been an incredible journey.
It has.
We've gone from man is the measure
Yeah.
to wisdom, agnosticism,
Yes.
and now a revolutionary view of justice.
It's pretty amazing, huh?
I feel like I need a whole new bookshelf
Uh-huh.
for all the philosophical rabbit holes.
Right.
Protagoras has opened up for me.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise.
Protagoras, though we only have fragments of his work,
Right.
continues to challenge and inspire us to
Yeah.
think differently about ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
our world,
Yeah.
and how we create a just and flourishing society.
If Protagoras is right,
Yeah.
and man is the measure,
Uh-huh.
then maybe the most important question.
We can ask ourselves is what kind of measure do we want to be?
It's a good question.
What values will guide our judgments?
Yeah.
What kind of world do we want to create
Mm-hmm.
through our individual choices and
Yeah.
our collective actions?
These are questions worth pondering
They are.
as we navigate our own complex
Yeah.
and ever-changing world.
Beautifully put.
Thank you.
And that, I think, is the essence of Protagoras' enduring legacy.
I agree.
He leaves us not with easy answers,
Right.
but with questions that compel us
Yeah.
to engage in the ongoing pursuit
Mm.
of wisdom, justice,
Uh-huh.
and a life well lived.
Not always that way.
And on that thought-provoking note,
Okay.
we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah, that's good.
Until next time,
Yeah.
keep questioning,
Keep questioning.
keep exploring,
Keep exploring.
and keep measuring up to your own highest potential.
I like that